All right. Well, good afternoon, Stuart.
Good afternoon.
We did a video on Saturday, I think it was, and somebody called us mommy slews.
A mommy sleuth.
Yeah.
I don't know what a mommy sleuth
Well,
is.
you're about to find out.
All right.
So I wasn't entirely sure either, but then, of course, watched a lot of videos from our favorite people: Zach Peter, Dave Neal, Shesty Flaw, and
Is it Shesty or Shearsty?
it's probably Shearsty.
Somebody
I'm sorry.
Somebody help us with the
I know.
pronunciation.
I try. I really do. I listen to her channel and I really try to pronounce it right.
I think,
feel like I messed
to be
it up
honest,
every
I was
time.
calling her Chesty, and I
That's
apologize.
definitely wrong.
Shearsty, that was wrong of me,
Yeah.
but I think it's Shearsty.
So it all comes down to this article in Glamour magazine by a reporter who apparently has a big beef with content creators.
Well, you asked me if I knew what mommy sleuths were,
Yeah.
and I didn't, but I have heard of this person, Stephanie McNeal, now. I had never heard that name until Saturday.
Yeah.
Now I've heard her name quite a bit. So I'd say if somebody won here, maybe Stephanie McNeal has won by getting a conversation started.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to know what you think of the conversation she started.
Yeah, it's a good point. They say all press is good press, right? But yeah, let's take a look at the article. And I want to start kind of halfway down because I want to actually look at what she said and kind of what her arguments are. And then let's talk about those arguments. We'll see, since we're professional arguers, we'll see if these arguments are any good. So first, she's talking about all the conspiracy theories, rumors, and criticism that content creators have created against Blake Lively. And she's saying that the theories this group of obsessives has been circulating widely online since Lively's legal battle against Baldoni began. So, in other words, we're all obsessives. And then while some men are jumping on board, I guess that's us, the most popular of these creators, which range from nobodies doing voiceovers to far-right provocateurs like Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly, are women speaking to other women. I like how she calls people nobodies. That's kind of a nice touch. So people online who are creating content and talking about this issue are nobodies in the eyes of this reporter. And then Owens is the one who coined the phrase of mommy slews, which are people who are investigating this. Of course, she puts investigating in quotations, investigating Lively alleged bad behavior. So that's the opening shot that she has. So this reporter essentially is laying it out here, saying that everybody who is following this online is really nothing more than conspiracy theories.
Well, who is Stephanie McNeal?
I don't know.
I mean, I've never even heard of her, and apparently she's saying that she's part of. Would this magazine be considered mainstream media? I'm not even sure what Glamour is. I know they've been around, and I'm sure she got a job with them, and she gets paid probably a W-2 salary. But who is she to say that these people are nobodies? I mean, is Zach Peter a nobody? Is Dave Neal a nobody? Is Candace Owens? Is it Owen or Owens? I'm going to get that right here.
Owens,
plural. What about Megyn Kelly? What about Joe Rogan? When Joe Rogan started his podcast, was he a nobody then? And is he a somebody today because he has a following? So do you have to have a following to be a somebody? Or do you have to be a journalist to be a somebody? Do you have to work for the New York Times or the New York Post or the Wall Street Journal or Glamour magazine before you can opine on these issues? Is this the thesis of her argument?
I think that's what she's getting at, is that in order to be a somebody, I think in this world, when you're going to be reporting, is you have to be a proper reporter, probably have a degree in journalism, I'd imagine, in her mind, and work for some publication. And so it seems like what she's saying is those are proper reporters and everybody else are mommy slews and nobodies.
Question. You're bringing me more questions. So my question is, Megan Twohey, is she a reporter?
Yes.
And is she an official reporter?
I would think so.
She works for mainstream media.
Right.
Okay. And does it look like perhaps there might have been some issues with her reporting on the Baldoni matter?
It certainly does.
Okay, so what if we're mommy sleuths, and I guess we're included in that because she said some men are jumping on board. I suppose she's referring to us.
Yes.
Okay, we've jumped on board.
Yeah.
But what's the opposite of a mommy sleuth then? I mean, what's the term we're going to give to the
hard-hitting journalist?
A hard-hitting journalist. Okay, yeah. All right. So she's a hard-hitting journalist. All right.
Yeah. So let's go down to let's see. It's going to be a couple pages down here, and it's a paragraph that starts with, "I'm just going to say it. This isn't normal."
Okay.
So that's her, again, her premise. So we're trying to outline her argument here. So I'm just going to say it, this isn't normal. And if you look a little bit further down, it says, if those against Me Too can't stop famous women from speaking out against sexual assault, abuse, or harassment, they can apparently slowly erode their credibility until they are pariahs, the target of such an unrelenting campaign of hate and misogyny that their public image is incurably damaged. So the hardest part of this to swallow is that women, mostly civilians, are the ones falling deepest down the rabbit hole, being convinced by TikTok to turn on one of their own. Well, I don't think most people who are following the story feel like Blake Lively is one of their own. Blake Lively is a celebrity. She's a person of privilege. She's obviously her and Ryan Reynolds are very rich. So I don't think this is just your run of the mill, one of my own that I'm turning on, even if, I'm not a woman, but I'm just saying that it doesn't seem like people would think it's one of their own. So that's the next stage of her argument. So she's saying this isn't normal and people are listening to TikTok. And by doing that, they're smearing a woman unnecessarily, I think.
One of the problems I'm having here is, how does she have all this information on the people on TikTok? I mean, it sounds like all of them are in lockstep and they're all doing this thing that she's talking about. I mean, aren't there varied opinions on TikTok?
Yes.
Aren't some people for Blake Lively? Aren't some people for Justin Baldoni and all of this?
There are a few people for Lively, not a ton. But on the other hand, I think what she's missing is, of the people who are talking about this, how many of them have actually looked at the facts and the evidence that we have available to us and have made a reasonable conclusion based on that information.
Another question I have, if I could get in trouble for this, so I apologize right up front, but if a woman saw another woman murder another woman, the woman who witnessed that, does she have some obligation to hide that murder because the murderer is a woman that killed a woman?
Right.
It seems to me that, why are we talking about women here? I mean, why can't people do investigations on their own, no matter what background they have, no matter what race they have, no matter what gender they have? And why can't they have an opinion on what's happening? And why can't they put that opinion out on YouTube or a podcast or whatever the way they want to put it out to the world, and have people measure what they're saying? And if people think they're crazy and kooks, they're not going to listen to them. But if somebody wants to do some research here and put their ideas out, what's wrong with that?
Especially when it's based off of factual information. And so, we've gone through, we've talked about the video that was released, the text messages that are released. It would be one thing. I think that she would have a better point here and a better argument if people were just saying things without any basis whatsoever. Like the mere fact that somebody raised an issue of SH, we now are going to hate this person. No, that, in fact, in the beginning, I think there's a lot of people who felt for Blake Lively until the facts started coming out and it looked like her claims were overblown and misstated. And it also kind of reminds me, because you said, why can't somebody else do it? Wasn't Einstein working as a patent clerk when he came up with the theory of relativity?
I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah, it's, it can come from anywhere. And so let's just go to the end and we'll kind of see the conclusion of this article. And there's a paragraph that says, it would be easy to dismiss. There we go. So kind of halfway down there, it says, instead, we live in a world where women's reproductive and civil rights are under assault by far-right misogynists who'd love to see our privileges dismantled. And then she talks about where a convicted sexual assaulter is the president and multiple members of his cabinet have also faced allegations of misconduct. And then next paragraph, this is the same world where a woman, even a powerful actress, faces the complete destruction of her reputation by online mommy sleuths for daring to accuse a man of sexual harassment. Okay, so there's a huge agenda in those two paragraphs, I think. So this is not somebody who is arguing from a place of being purely objective. Clearly, she has problems with the idea that somebody would attack a woman for bringing up SH claims. That's how she views it. She's obviously very against the president. And she's also thinking that the mommy sleuths are accusing a woman for standing up and daring to accuse a man of SH. I haven't seen anybody do that. I haven't seen anybody critique Blake Lively for the fact that she made the SH claim. The critiques that I've seen are because she made the claim and then evidence and facts came out that showed that she was overstating the claims, that she wasn't being truthful, That, I think, is what the problem is. And that's where the criticism has come for Blake Lively, not the mere fact that she made a claim. Am I seeing that wrong?
No, I think you're seeing it right. And I look, again, this comes back to this. I have now forgotten my reporter's name here, Stephanie McNeal. This comes back to Stephanie McNeal sitting in her ivory tower where she's looking down on people that are doing the job that she worked so hard to get and the job she wanted to do. And she's coming after these people and she's using gender as a way to say, hey, poor Blake Lively made this accusation, and apparently she assumes that it's a true and honest representation that Blake Lively made, and people are attacking her because she's a woman and she's made this claim. Look, if that was the case, I would be for Blake Lively. I think Blake Lively should be entitled to make a sexual harassment claim if she truly was sexually harassed. SH, sorry, I'm messing this up. If she truly was SH, any woman should be able to make a claim under law and be protected from that type of activity. The problem, I think, that many of these mommy sleuths, as they've been called, or people, just regular people that are looking into the story and learning more about it, I think they're finding out that, hey, there's something wrong here. Somebody's being attacked. Somebody's using the Me Too movement. They're using all this political capital that was built up over time, and they're using it for their benefit to destroy another person who probably didn't do these things, or maybe didn't do these things. At least there's no evidence that we see that leads us to believe he did these things. And it is that truly David and Goliath moment, much like this Stephanie McNeal, who is a reporter, and then you've got all these people on YouTube, these content creators, as Zach Peter pointed out, they call them influencers, but they're really content. These are smart people. Some of them have degrees, some of them don't have degrees. Some of them are better in front of a camera, others are not. You and I probably aren't very good in front of a camera. That's not where we've spent our careers. Right. We're better in front of a jury or a courtroom. But people need to understand that this reporter needs to understand that everyone should have the opportunity to have their 2 cents on this case. And the one thing I'd say to her is if she thinks she has a better idea than all these mommy sleuths, if she is better at this than these mommy sleuths, then put out a good article.
Right.
Put out good writing. Put out something that we can all consider and chew on. And, if her goal here was to get everybody upset, well, she met her goal. But if her goal here was to convince people that there are people out there that shouldn't be doing this, I think she really missed her mark.
Or if she's trying to get to the truth of the matter. Now, it would be a more convincing argument if a reporter came on here and said, well, everybody is saying this, but there's evidence that hasn't been shown yet. And, maybe she actually found something. She went out and did her investigating and found something. Now, that would be a story, right? Here's some great piece of evidence that nobody knows about yet.
Look, I think there was a Christoph, his name, New York Times. He is on the op-ed page. And it was not long after the Megan Twohey article came out in the New York Times. And he did an op-ed on Blake Lively. And he actually had positive things to say about her as a person. He said, I worked with her on some DV issues. This is way back in the day. And he found her to be pleasant, easy to talk to, kind, generous. He had a very good view of her. As far as the claim that he had just learned about, this claim that was being made of SH and so forth against Justin Baldoni, he says, hey, we got to reserve. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like, we got to reserve. We got to hear his side of the story too. Both sides get to tell their story. And then where we see where this goes. And that was the op-ed page, the page that actually where they do take positions. He did not take a position there because he wanted everyone to give, hey, let's give this some time and let's see where it falls. That's not what I'm seeing from this article that Miss McNeal wrote. What I'm seeing is you mommy sleuths are, and no-name people that really aren't all that important. You guys need to stop doing this because you're somehow, I guess, hurting women. I'm not sure how she makes that transition.
I think it's worse to use SH claims, in the wrong way than it is, I think that's a horrible thing to do if that's what's happening here. But so then the reporter doubles down and then she goes on TikTok and here's her argument. Her argument is that I get paid a set salary and these content creators make money off YouTube. In fact, she says they make more money than I do on YouTube. And yet I am just a humble reporter getting a set salary. So what's the problem with that argument in your mind?
Well, I mean, this Glamour magazine, they make their money off of ads and they need eyeballs on their paper to read the paper. And so they therefore need to have good articles, or at least articles to get people looking at them, right? And then they take that money and they give them to their reporters, or they give them to their journalists or whoever it is that are writing these documents or that work for them. So how is that any different than somebody that's on a YouTube channel, and they're doing the best they can to make it? They're buying nice equipment, and they're making their arguments, and they're putting their arguments out there for people to consider and see if they make sense. And of course, not everybody follow. Like Joe Rogan has a huge following. Why does Joe Rogan have a huge following? I mean, it's because people like him. They think he's authentic. They think, oh, some people don't like him, but the people that do follow him and listen to him, they like him. And what if this reporter said, well, Joe Rogan's just a mommy sleuth. Why should, and he started out as a mommy sleuth, right? He started out doing
as a nobody.
Yeah. And he became a somebody. Well, he did that because he put out good content, and content that was interesting, and content that people wanted to see. That's the same thing that Glamour's doing, or at least attempting to do, with their magazine. And they should. They're a business venture. They want to make money. Yeah. And with that money, they have to pay people to do work. There's nothing wrong with that. They should be able to do that. Why can't YouTubers and podcasters, why can't they also try to do those things?
Yeah, and that's why it's just a poor argument. So essentially what's at the core of that argument is, I'm objective because I get a set salary. But how long are you going to be employed by Glamour if you're not writing articles that people want to read? And so, you can say, well, I can write an article and it doesn't matter if you read it or not, I get paid the same. You might get paid the same, but your job security is not going to be the same if you're writing articles that nobody wants to read. So it is an interesting argument. I don't think it really helped her cause at all. And again, I think the bigger problem is there's an agenda here. There's a message that this reporter wanted to get out. And we saw that in terms of the last paragraphs of her article. And I think that was the bigger issue for her.
Yeah, Leanne Walters has a good point. She says, also, isn't Glamour now a content creator? They're only available online. Yeah, they're not even a paper or a magazine, a printed magazine anymore, Stuart.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And again, I don't have anything against Glamour magazine. I don't have anything against this reporter. In fact, she struck gold if she wanted people to talk about this. But I don't think that's what she wanted. I think she was trying to make a point, and I'm not sure she made the point. I'm not sure it hit where she wanted it to, because people are upset now and saying, why are you writing this article? Why are you saying these people? First of all, why are these mommy sleuths? I don't even know what that means. Is that a negative term?
No, I think Candace has quoted it as a positive. It was a positive
So
term.
you think she's using the Glamour journalist here is using that as a positive term?
No, I think she's turning it around trying to make it negative.
Okay.
But I think the original use of it by Candace was something positive, which is there's a lot of people out there who are looking into this and doing their own investigation online.
Right. Well, don't we want, before we move on to the other story we wanted to talk about, don't we want our people in the United States, don't we want them to have discussions with each other, informed discussions with each other about the issues that we're facing in our country?
Yes,
and
of course.
Shouldn't we be researching on our own? And shouldn't we, we can watch the mainstream media too. They put out a good product. It's a professional product, and very seasoned people. Wolf Blitzer, and I have a lot of respect for him. That's just my personal go-to. I really enjoy him. I'm sure there's people on Fox News that are more mainstream, and you can hear what people have to say about what's going on. But that doesn't mean you don't have to go back and do some research on your own. And it's not like I'm just going to rely on Glamour magazine or Fox News or CNN to tell me what my worldview should be. But they get it started, and then I go do some research on my own. Then I have conversations with you. I have conversations with my other friends. I even have conversations with my friends that don't share the same political party that I do, because I want to understand where they're coming from on this issue. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I love the idea of content creators. We've named a few, but I love, let me just name a couple more. You have Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens. They're all going to be on the conservative side, but they get you thinking about things. And then you've got on the liberal side, David Hackman, the Young Turks, Sam Cedar of the Majority Report. These are all people. We shouldn't hate on all these people. We should be very happy that they're putting out stuff for us all to look at. And then we can discuss it amongst ourselves to say, hey, do you think Ben Shapiro's right on this? Or do you think that David Hackman is wrong on this? And here's why I think he's wrong on it. At least it educates us and gets us talking about it. And then if we want to give our opinion on YouTube or a podcast or something else we want to do, I think we should be permitted to do that. And the audience, that they'll either show up or they won't.
Yeah, it really democratizes information and democratizes the news, which in some respects, I could see where that would be threatening to reporters. But it does allow for more people to have more of a voice, and then you can make up your own mind. I think that's a brilliant statement. There was something else that happened, something minor that happened in the Lively case. want to go to that next?
Yeah, sure.
So there was a filing by Leslie Sloan and Vision PR. Yeah. So Leslie Sloan did file a reply last week. I think it was on Friday. That reply, we did see it. We took a look at it. We didn't feel like it was worth talking about because the reply to her motion to dismiss really just rehashed all of her same arguments in her motion, which is not ideal for a reply. But
Before you go there,
yeah.
So the reply that Miss Sloan and Vision PR did, this goes back to us as lawyers. When we put our arguments on in front of a judge, how do you do that? And so what Vision PR did is they did a moving paper that had all of their arguments, right? So the initial paper, that's the moving paper. They have all their arguments. Then there's an opposition that's filed, and then there's a reply. And the reply is supposed to address the opposition, right? And here, the reply, from our view, we didn't read it all that closely. We did look at it. It looks like they basically just do the full moving arguments again in the reply, whereas what would most judges want?
They would want a short, punchy reply that just responded to any new arguments or information that was in the opposition. And so typically a reply is going to be pretty short. It might be 5, 6, 7 pages tops.
So if I was representing Vision PR and Leslie Sloan and I had brought the motion to dismiss, and then Baldoni gives us a nice response back and opposes that, and maybe I didn't make one of my points strong enough, or they have basically pulled one of my statements out of context, that's where in the reply. In fact, do I even have to file a reply?
You don't.
But if I do, make it short, make it punchy, give the court what they want, because I know many judges that actually read these things in reverse. They'll get the moving paper, the opposing paper, and the reply paper. They'll take the reply paper and read it first, and then they'll go to the opposition, and then they'll go to the moving papers. Here, they would be lost as to what the reply was actually pointing to in the way that I viewed it.
Yeah, it was pretty long, and it really wasn't what a reply normally would be, but that's fine. I mean, the judge will decide. So this morning, what Leslie Sloan filed was a motion to stay discovery. So she wants the same deal that the New York Times has,
but she got discovery, right?
She got served with discovery. So this is interesting because I didn't know this until I saw her motion. It says the Wayfarer parties served a striking, she calls it striking, 307 requests for production of documents and 18 interrogatories on the Sloan parties. So is that a lot of discovery?
The interrogatories are very reasonable, and people need to understand that document requests, that's where we're going to have our largest amount of things we're asking for, because we don't want to miss any documents that are out there. Probably, how many were there? 300 and some?
370.
370. I mean, that's work. There's no doubt that it's work to get through that. But the fear you have as a lawyer is the other side has a document, and if you don't cast a wide enough net, you're not going to get that document. So of those 370 requests, she may only have documents that respond to 100 of them or 50 of them, right? And she'll have to give those documents up, but they wanted to make sure that they were getting all the documents from her.
Yeah, so she's saying it's striking. It's not, I don't think it's that striking. Like you said, 18 interrogatories is really no big deal at all. The 370 document requests, okay. So she wants to stay discovery until her motion to dismiss is decided by the court, and she's saying it's fully briefed, which she's right, it is. And at some point, then they'll have a hearing on that and see what the ruling is. So it'll be interesting to see if the court gives Sloan the same deal that he did the New York Times. I think it is a little different, though, because, we've mentioned this before, but Sloan does not have the fair reporting privilege. So her chances of succeeding on the merits is very different from what the Times arguments are.
True. And the judge has already laid out his schedule for this case. And so the minute you start staying discovery for multiple defendants, you're really putting Justin Baldoni and his group at a disadvantage from making those deadlines, getting the depositions after that, getting the expert depositions after that, getting ready for trial. It sets things back. So if I was a betting man, and I'm not, I would say the judge probably allows the discovery to go forward. Maybe he curtails the 370 document demands. But again, document demands generally, there's no limit to them, at least in California, there's no limit to document demands. As with any rule, you have to use it within reason. And so if you think that you need all of these documents, and I'll give you an example. Let's say that you're asking for a particular statement on a particular date and a particular time, but there's multiple asks for these different various statements. You might ask, just to make sure you're getting all of them, in 10 different document demands for those particular documents. Whereas if you did them all in one, what do you get from the other side? The other side says, well, we don't know what you want.
Yeah.
You ask too many things. And so sometimes you're doing short, punchy statements just to make sure that you're getting all the documents. And quite frankly, 370 documents, if they think that there's not a lot of documents that are responsive to that, they simply can look and say, we've done a good faith search. We haven't found any documents, and therefore there are no documents. We don't even believe there are any documents. And that would be the answer for the majority of them if that's their position. But if they have documents that are responsive, they're probably going to have to give them up.
Yeah, I think so.
Absent a privilege.
Yeah, right. Unless they have some sort of privilege. But it's interesting. We'll see what they do.
I just want to get to this last one. I thought this was a, thoughtful question. Lee says, do you think that the New York Times or other publications would continue to write articles about an issue they are in litigation for? And that's what we kind of have, complained about, them being silent on this, not seeing through the process of Baldoni and Lively. But what do you think about this?
I think they would. And I think there's been other cases where the New York Times have been sued and they continue to write articles. And I think it would actually help their case if they continued writing articles, because they could show that that was just the first step in a series of articles where they're trying to get to the truth. I think the problem is when you have one article that looks like it was written prior to the CRD complaint even being filed, it starts to show, it feels more like collusion because of that, versus if they kept pursuing the topic. I would be shocked if somebody like the New York Times is not reporting on this because of this lawsuit. I mean, it's possible, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I really wish that there were, it's funny how the content creators have really picked this case up and gone forward with it. And I think one of the things that have come out of the content creators is the question of what subpoena was used to get these documents that were ultimately given to the New York Times. And still to this date, nobody can point to a case that credibly to me, I say, oh, sure, that's the case where the subpoena was used to get these documents. And I think it's been the mommy sleuths that actually got to the bottom of this. It would have been nice to see some articles in major newspapers that discussed how this process is going. How did we end up here? And if there is this grand conspiracy in these public cases to tarnish and feather each other in the court of public opinion, and whoever wins that first wins the case, essentially, that is something very interesting to write about. There's actually, this is the issues it deals with primacy and recency. And the question is, plaintiffs' lawyers, when they put a case on in front of a jury, they want to get that opening statement and they want to win in that opening statement. And that's why defense attorneys sometimes they object all the way through the opening statement, which I think actually hurts them because it makes it seem like they're trying to hide information from the jury. But the idea is you want to win with primacy. You want people to realize that, hey, you just had this argument put in front of you. It sounds so compelling. And then when the defense attorney gets up and starts talking, well, it really doesn't matter because you're already kind of convinced on what has happened. That's what's going on here. We need to get people talking about this case. We need to understand what was going on. I wish the New York Times would write some more articles.
Well, it's the mommy sleuths that also figured out the metadata for all the images on New York Times. And so, but let's just say for a moment that you're a reporter and in your mind, you're perfectly fine with having Justin Baldoni fall and his life being ruined as long as nothing stands in the way of the Me Too movement. That's how strongly you feel about the Me Too movement. Would you continue reporting on this story? Or if that's your kind of viewpoint, would you be like, I'm not going to report on this story?
Well, if you found out that the story, if you were to continue with the story, did not support the Me Too movement or support the idea of perhaps, winning journalistic awards, you may not. And then again, I don't even know if we're talking about specifically about Megan Toohey. I'm not even sure she's made this decision. I'm sure
I'm just thinking of a theoretical.
Somebody at the New York Times
reporter
has decided not to continue to write on the story. But I'm glad that everyone else has continued. The content creators have continued. It's been a great learning experience for us all.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see what the judge does, whether they stay discovery as to Leslie Sloan, but that's the latest request from her.
Okay, Keith. So next issue, do we have a constitutional crisis? Do we have some things happening between the Trump administration and the court system, the federal court system, that is going to cause a constitutional crisis? And a constitutional crisis, as I understand it, would be when one branch of the government refuses to follow the dictates of another branch of government who has the authority to tell them yes or no on an issue.
That's interesting. I don't know that I would frame it quite that way. I think that there's a lot of stressful things going on, a lot of unconventional things going on that feel chaotic. I don't think we're at the level of constitutional crisis yet. I also strongly believe, at least based on the founders of our system, that each branch is intended to work independently. So when you say, now there are things though where the government has decided to make itself open to lawsuits. There's an actual there's what we call the sovereign immunity. So the government can choose to be sued or choose not to be sued on a particular issue. And I think that's what you're getting at, is that if the government says, then the legislature has spoken that, yes, we're going to go to court on these issues, then I think then the judiciary gets to decide, and the executive should probably follow that order.
Well, let me give you an example. So over the weekend, we had 2 cases happen in the federal district courts. And apparently the Trump administration has ignored both federal district judges' orders. And, this is unprecedented. You don't see the president's administration just willy-nilly ignoring court orders. Federal judges aren't used to people ignoring their orders. Any judge, state judges are important too, but federal judges, these are very powerful people. So in Rhode Island, we have a 34-year-old physician. Her name is Rasha Alawi. And Rasha Alawi, she's a U.S. visa holder. And the federal judge there is Leo Sorokin. And Leo Sorokin's out of Massachusetts. He's out of the Massachusetts Federal District Court. He makes an order to the Trump administration and says, you will not deport Dr. Alawi until you give me at least 2 days notice and we have some type of hearing on it. And the Trump administration, they ignored that order and they just deported her anyway. Your thoughts?
That is pretty surprising. I mean, I haven't looked at the case or the evidence, but if you have a court order saying we need to decide whether or not this person should be deported, I think that that's an order that should be followed. I mean, it kind of brings into my mind who should be deciding evidence. And so if the executive is identifying somebody as a problem or somebody who should be deported, should the executive branch also be the ones weighing the evidence to decide, if it's true or not, the allegation? So let me give you an example. Let's say that tomorrow, just out of the blue, a family member of yours is arrested. I'm not going to use you as an example because I did that too much on Saturday. So let's say a family member of yours is arrested on attempted murder, and that they didn't do it. They were at your house. No way it could possibly be true, but they're arrested for murder. Who should decide the evidence in that case? Should it be the police or should it be the court system where they bring in a jury?
It should be me because it's my family member.
Yeah, right. Well, it's not going to be you, and it's not going to be the police. It's going to be the court system in front of a jury. And we have that system for a reason, so that everybody can bring forth evidence.
Yeah, we call this due process of law,
yes.
Right? And so, I mean, let's think about this. Back in the 1200s, 1300s, the Dark Ages, if you were walking down the wrong path at the wrong time and somebody didn't like you walking there, they literally could come out and say, hey, you come here, and they'd cut your head off, right? And that's not much due process, is it?
No, not a lot.
There's no question of why are you walking on the path? Where are you headed? I have a note here to the king, whatever it is, there's no inquiry as to why that is. And so we have these concepts of due process. And the question then is, well, who's the decider? Who's the decider on these issues?
Yes.
And so do we want the police officer that comes, let's say that you're driving and a police officer inappropriately pulls you over. Do you want that police officer issuing you the citation and then making judgment against you for the amount you have to pay? Or do you want the ability to go in front of an independent person who we call judges, a judge, and make your plea as to why I should not be getting a ticket? Police officer has to show up too, and they have to make the claim that you should be getting the ticket. And this person, after they hear both sides of the story and see all the evidence, and they're in a position to judge, because they're usually bright people that we put in these positions, they make a judgment, and therefore due process is met. And so that's actually the system we want, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And people complain about how the judicial system kind of runs slowly, but the reason why it takes so much time is because of due process. Every party is given an opportunity to go and find evidence, collect evidence. Every party is given an opportunity to make arguments. Every party is given an opportunity to present evidence. And ultimately, either the judge or jury decides, depending on the type of case it is, and that ends up being your answer for that issue between those parties. And it's a wonderful system. It's the best system, we could come up with, but it is time consuming and it is expensive at times to administer. but that's the system we have, and I think we need to respect it.
Well, and I agree with you. And Judge Leo Sorokin, whose order was apparently ignored by the White House, who did deport Dr. Alawe, 34-year-old Rhode Island medical doctor, against his order. He called the Trump administration into his courtroom this morning at 10 a.m. I have not seen what happened there, but he wanted to have a discussion with them as to
I'd imagine so,
why
yeah.
his order
What's
was not
happening
followed.
here?
But that's not the only order. There's the D.C. Federal District Judge James Boasberg, and he's not sure what to do here. This happened over the weekend, where you had these flights of El Salvador migrant workers, or I guess according to the Trump administration, these were members of a gang, a very dangerous gang out of El Salvador, Venezuela, one of the two. And it's called Tren de Aragua. I think I got that right. And so the issue there is that these people were deported on an airplane back to a foreign country, and they're out of our country, but they were they were deported under a law that was passed in 1798 when John Adams, our second president, was president.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
And the issue in that case is, if you do it under this law, you don't have to give due process to these people. You don't have to give them a judge. You can simply send them on their way, versus having a judge review each person's case to make sure, yes, this person really is part of this dangerous gang, Tren de Aragua, and they need to be put out, rather than just some police officer, somebody in the administration deciding that they have to go. What are your thoughts there?
I think there's two thoughts there. First of all, this is a very good example of how law is not applied in a vacuum. So you're talking about people who, if it's true, are part of a dangerous gang. That's a different, most people are going to think differently of that, versus if they were to round up people who are productive members of society working, high-tech jobs or something, and they do the same thing to them. And so facts matter in every case. The question, though, it goes back to due process. Were these people truly gang members? And if so, what process are we using to establish that and prove that? But the Alien Enemies Act is kind of interesting. Passed in 1798, only used 3 times. In the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II.
And how did we use it in World War II?
It was horrible. So in World War II, that is the act that the government used to intern Japanese Americans. And a lot of those were citizens.
Yes.
I mean, it was just shocking in hindsight. Now, from today's point of view, it's just, horrible what happened. But that was the law that the government used to justify interning Japanese Americans, even citizens. And so I think that gets the broader question of, okay, these laws are good when they're used properly, but they can also be a little scary, and they can actually take away rights of citizens, like what happened in World War II. So we do need to be vigilant. We do need to be careful about how we're going to use these. And the interesting thing is that the 3 times that we used it, War of 1812, World War I, World War II, those were all declared wars. Congress had declared war. Here, there's no declared war. And so they're trying to use it for an enemy that the president has identified, which may well be somebody who is an enemy of the state against America. I mean, they could well be doing horrible things. But the question becomes, is this the right act to use to do it? Number one. And number two, is this the right process we want to use to do it?
I guess my thoughts on this, and I'm really interested in what our jury pool thinks of this. Should we be deporting people that have not had a judge review their case? This, again, is akin to a police officer pulling you over and the police officer deciding to throw you out of the country. Wouldn't we rather have the police officer pull you over, make allegations against you, write you up for whatever it is that we need to throw you out of the country for, and at least you have the opportunity to have a judge look at this? And I would say, this really comes down to public safety. These are the people that were sent out of the country. If they truly are this horrible gang and they're not good people, well, I don't think there's a lot of sympathy that lies with these people being thrown out of our country. But the question is, are they these people, and who makes that determination? That's really the issue. So how do we get there? And if all of these people were arrested and they were detained and they were being controlled, why do we need to rush under this act from 1798? Why can't we run it through the system and have judges at least review to make sure that somebody's uncle, brother, cousin, aunt, sister, brother is not caught up in this, who is not part of this danger?
Wrongly accused.
Yeah, wrongly accused somehow, some way, because this is going to change this person's life forever. Or, Keith, do we just sacrifice those people, those few instances where that would happen, to get these dangerous people out of our country, and we don't give them due process. We simply just send them along the way. So to the jury pool, I'm interested. Do we just kick people out of the country based upon the administration's determination that they're dangerous and they need to go? Or should we have judges review the case one by one to make sure that we're not sending somebody that should not be sent?
And what about the precedent that this sets? And so, again, laws never applied in a vacuum. So this time you're talking about people who sound quite heinous and you're using this law. What if the next time it's a little less heinous and then a little less and then a little less? Would you still feel good about this law if you're sending out people who were jaywalking, but otherwise are working and helping America by working, tech jobs or whatever it is that people holding green cards do? Would you still feel the same way about it?
Yeah. And the most interesting part of this to me, Keith, is it looks like we have 2 federal district court judges who made orders that have been either accidentally or intentionally ignored by the Trump administration. And I'm not trying to be Republican or Democrat here. I'm just saying, should administrations, whether it's a conservative administration or a liberal or a middle of the road administration, should they be required to follow federal district court orders? And this draws us back to a conversation we had the other day, and that has to do with the seminal case of Marbury versus Madison, which we now know was decided in 1803. I thought it was 1804, but it was 1803.
Oh, that's awfully close.
I was very close. I almost got there. And that had to do with giving the Supreme Court its right to have judicial overview of the laws, right? And to say what the law is and whether it is constitutional or not. And there's been a general person's agreement from 1803 pretty much to now that the Supreme Court and the federal courts, they get to say when something is unconstitutional, and they also get to make orders. And the executive is supposed to follow these orders. The legislature is supposed to follow these orders. And now you have 2 orders that went out, and it appears that both orders were not followed. This makes me kind of wonder, are we getting into dangerous territory here? Yeah. I'm not ready to say we're having a constitutional crisis, but this will obviously go up to the Supreme Court, you would think. And then what happens when the Supreme Court, they're going to have to be very, very careful. Is this another Marbury versus Madison moment where the Supreme Court finds in favor of the Trump administration, but then reestablishes its right to oversee these types of cases? Or does it go against the Trump administration? And then the bigger question is, does the Trump administration follow that court order?
Yeah, Marbury versus Madison would be like if I wake up tomorrow and I decide from now on I get to overturn your decisions. And so if you decide you're going to buy a new car, I'm going to say, nope, no, you're not. And you say, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Because that was never in the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the Supreme Court has a right to strike down laws passed by the legislature due to them being unconstitutional.
That all comes from Marbury versus Madison.
They just took it for themselves, and then everybody, by and large, kind of went along with it. But it's not in the Constitution. So it's kind of like what happened when George Washington retired or stepped down after 2 terms as president. That was the precedent that existed until FDR. And then Franklin Roosevelt's like, nope, I want a 3rd term and then a 4th term. And then what did they do? It wasn't in the Constitution. They had to pass a constitutional amendment to change it. So that could happen here. You could have a constitutional amendment that gives the Supreme Court that power per the Constitution, but that's not the way it is right now. So really interesting issue as to, and then if it comes to pass that the legislature no longer and the executive no longer says the Supreme Court has the right to strike down laws as unconstitutional, is that a constitutional crisis, or is it just the way our system was designed to work?
I think it's a constitutional crisis, and I know you and I have a difference of opinion on this, but I think it is because we as a people, we as a culture have accepted for well over 200 years our form of government, and our form of government has worked really well for the most part. And that is, you need to have an executive checked by the judiciary. You need to have the executive checked by the legislative branch as well, and vice versa for each one of those branches. The whole point was we didn't want somebody that was all powerful, somebody that could just do whatever they wanted at any time. There are governments out there where people are in charge and they can do whatever they want. And that's not the way we've done it here in the United States. And so I think it would be a significant shift if a administration, and again, this is the Trump administration, I think if any administration decided that they were going to just ignore court orders, I think the system breaks to some degree at that point. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing here? I mean, if you can't respect a federal judge when they tell you don't do this, and think about this. If you went into just a state court, well, let's do federal court, but a state or federal court, and a judge ordered you to do something. Keith Davidson, I'm ordering you to do this. And you ignored that order. What do you think that federal judge would do to you?
Yeah, it's going to get ugly real quick.
Real quick. I mean, you may be spending some time in a little alone room for some time to contemplate on whether that was a good decision or not.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be a fine involved and a chewing out on top of it. So I think we've all just kind of accepted that when federal judges give orders, people follow them. And I think that, Judge Sorokin, I think he's just at a loss of words. Like, I gave an order and it wasn't followed through. Hey, come. I need people to come and sit down and talk with me. I want to know what the heck is going on. Why aren't you following my order? And I know there were some, not excuses, but there were some talking points put out by the White House on this whole Venezuelan El Salvador thing where, these prisoners, very dangerous, allegedly, gang members that were sent back. There's been some talking points about whether there was a written order or an oral order, or that the planes were already in the air and they were in international airspace. And therefore, you can't call them back at that point because that's at the purview of the president. But I still think that there's a bigger issue here, and that is, should administrations, including the Trump administration, should they be bound by federal court orders or not? Or not?
Well, and it's easy to say that a Venezuelan gang member should go back to Venezuela. Okay, that's fine. But it comes back to what's the process, and once you set up that process, you really need to follow it, because that's the process that's going to apply to the guilty, but also the innocent. And that's the issue. And so when you find yourself in that system, and especially if you're wrongly accused, you want a system that has due process. That's what protects us as citizens, as free citizens, is due process. You want that. And so that's the part that gets a little scary for me.
Yeah, and we'll do a little bit more talking too. There was an individual with a green card that was actually he's in Louisiana right now, and we'll talk more about that case as time comes. There is one other thing I wanted to address, Keith. You and I, we fly lots of places, and a couple weeks ago we were flying through Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we happened to be flying through the day after Gene Hackman passed away.
Yeah,
and we went to a restaurant there to grab a bite to eat, and we pulled up on my map. We literally were like 12 minutes from his house where we were having lunch that day. And he was one of my favorite actors. Obviously, there's been some news that has come out. You actually know one of the attorneys involved in the case from Los Angeles. We don't have copies of the wills yet. We need to see those so we can trace those through. But what are your 2 cents thus far on the Hackman case?
Well, and I would like to ask the jury pool that if anybody out there has any access to those wills. I went online. I could see the case, but I wasn't able to access the documents. I think you have to be a New Mexico attorney or something. So anybody who has any insight on giving us the actual documents. I've read articles about the wills, but I want to see the actual will itself, because I'd be curious to see kind of what the provisions are. It was heartbreaking, just the whole way that transpired. I saw another article just today that perhaps the wife made a call early in the morning on the 12th, I think it was. And so now they think that maybe she was alive an extra day based on what she was before, what they thought she was before. But just a heartbreaking sequence of events. He was 95, but still, that's not the way you'd want to go.
Apparently suffering from late stages of dementia, $80 million estate, apparently. We have 3 kids from his side.
Yeah.
And apparently we haven't seen the wills, but apparently none of the kids are in the wills. Go ahead.
But why does it pass by will? Like, rich people use trusts.
I'm thinking it probably is a New Mexico thing. I mean, in California, you would have a trust in most cases, I would think. You don't have to. You can have a will, but it's a much more expensive and slower process to pass your estate along. So most people in California that are worth well less than $80 million, they have trusts and a backup will. We call it a pour over will that pours over into the trust. But I'll bet you in New Mexico, and they were there for about 20, 25 years after they left Hollywood, I'll bet you just a simple will works great in New Mexico.
And there could have been wills, other trusts that we don't know about that left something to the kids. I suspect not, because my understanding is the kids have already hired an attorney and are looking into this. I'm not sure that they would do that if they were given some sort of a child's trust that left them any amount of money.
Yeah, so what we understand is that Gene Hackman, 95, his wife was 65. So you would presume, most people would presume that she will outlive her husband, right? So his will apparently gave everything to her. And then I think her will gave everything to charity. Is that how that worked?
That's my understanding. And then the question is, his will left, everything to her. But what happens? So it's a very interesting. So yeah, we're going to need to get a copy of the will. We'll do a separate episode on this. But what happens is, and I read that the wills have a survivability clause. So you have to survive for 90 days, or else you're not deemed to have survived. Well, they suspect that the wife died first, so she didn't survive. But even without that, even if it's what we call simultaneous deaths, she had to have survived 90 days. And if she didn't, then there's usually a default provision in the will, which I'd like to see.
Default provision in Gene Hackman's will.
In Gene Hackman's will, there'd be a default provision. And if there isn't, then it would go intestate, which by the intestacy laws, which usually means it goes to the kids. So I'm very curious to see his will.
So it gives it to her, but she has to survive him. So there's arguments that she did not survive him. So then we look to his will. Is there other provisions in the will that say where it goes if it doesn't go to her?
Yes.
And if there are no provisions at all, then we'd have an intestate distribution. Can you explain what does that mean, an intestate distribution of the estate?
It's what we called your forced estate plan. So if you don't do a trust or will, then the government has already set up laws to dictate how your assets are going to go, and they're going to go to your spouse. If it's community, like in California, it goes to your spouse. If it's community property, and if you don't have a spouse, it goes to your children. And if you don't have a spouse or children, it goes up to your parents and then over to your brothers and sisters and nephews and nieces. There's a whole statutory scheme on how your assets are going to spread out.
I got a chuckle because you just talked about community property and how that applies in California. One of the reporters said, to complicate matters worse, New Mexico is a community property state. It's really not that difficult.
It's not that complicated.
It's just a little different way of viewing stuff. So anyway, well, that'll be interesting. If anybody has an idea of where those wills are, we'd love to see them. And if we can see them, then we can trace through what will happen in this case.
Yeah.
If the kids are not in the will, and let's say that Gene Hackman did designate somebody outside of his wife, do the kids have a chance of getting anything here?
Ooh, boy. Yeah, then you'd have a will contest on your hands. And based on the articles I've seen, these wills were created in like 1995 or something. So it would be tough to contest those, but you certainly could have a lawsuit on your hands, and they could give it a shot and see what happens. It'd be kind of interesting to see that lawsuit and see how that plays out. And I know that they already hired lawyers, so there's some chance that maybe we will see a lawsuit, but I'm sure we'll get a copy of the will sooner or later, but it'd be great to see it and break it down.
One other thing to keep in mind here is the issue of who died first will be important.
Yeah.
And so in a civil court, and I don't know New Mexico law, but California, we have what we call preponderance of the evidence. And preponderance of the evidence is just a bit better than 50%. So if you think about it, you could literally get an F on a paper in college. And as long as it's a bit better than 50%, you've met the threshold of preponderance of the evidence. And we've seen juries actually deliberate behind a double pane mirror. I think that's what you call that.
Yeah.
We've seen juries deliberate over what is the standard that you have to use to determine the proof in a case. And we've seen juries in civil matters talk about, well, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the criminal standard. And that is a really high standard. But the standard here, probably for the will contest and anything else that happens in the Gene Hackman case, more than likely, unless statute changes it, it'll be preponderance of the evidence, which means it has to be just a little bit better than the other side, and it goes in your favor.
Yeah, so it'd be very interesting to see that type of lawsuit. I don't know that they'll file it. It is not easy to contest a will that is that old, but we'll see.
We had a jury pool member said, I did hear that Gene had drawn a trust 20 years ago, questionably, but no details. So if anything comes up, someone here had it first.
And that's the problem, is that trusts are private. So trusts, unlike wills, are not going to be filed in the probate court. You're not going to generally see them unless they're litigated. So if there's a lawsuit over a trust, then we might see it in the court. But without that, you're not going to see a trust. It's a private document, so we just won't know.
Yeah, well, and very tragic case. When we first heard about it, we said, God, this has to be a murder-suicide. There has to be something horrible going on here. But it sounds like she died of this terrible virus that hantavirus, 40% fatality rate. Unbelievable. I mean, you don't get better if you get the hantavirus.
No.
So everybody, when you clean up rat droppings or mice droppings, make sure to use bleach, gloves, and a mask. And then make sure you dispose of that stuff very carefully. If you get the hantavirus, not good news.
No, just terrible.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Anything else, Eric?
I want to get to a couple feel good comments here. WC said, when I feel like the world has lost its mind, I listen to you and feel better that some people still have sense.
Thank you, WC.
WC, you just became my favorite person.
Atiani says, you are my 2 favorite lawyers now.
Awesome.
But yeah,
but who's your real favorite?
yeah. And how many do you know? And Katie said he was curious if we were going to cover the Gene Hackman estate case. So yeah, kind of TBD, but yeah, I assume we'll put out a longer video at some point.
Yeah, if we could get the wills, I'd really love to break them down. We'll get them eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to tap into a New Mexico attorney. I
Yep.
think I know one.
Yep. Well, listen, this has been a fun day. We'd love to hear your comments on all the stuff we talked about today. Let us know what side you fall down on these issues. Let us know what else you'd like us to cover. We'll be covering things as we go along here, but if there's anything in particular people want us to look at, we're happy to do that.
Yeah, sounds good. Have a great afternoon.
Have a great afternoon. See you later.